Hello and welcome to Sharpening Your Tools, presented by the Carnegie Gallery. I'm Emmali Branton. Thanks for tuning in. In our previous series, The Artist's Toolbox, Carnegie curator Marla Panko highlighted elements of composition, including balance, depth, and unity. We looked at masterworks from history, as well as works from some of the Carnegie's own artist members. Now, we're going to take some of what we learned about composition and apply it together, using a tool that you probably already have in your hand, your phone. Thanks to smartphones, photography is a medium virtually everyone has access to these days, and it's very easy to take a picture without thinking about what that picture really looks like. But you don't need access to a high-end camera to start thinking about photographic composition. And once you've applied this thinking to your photos, it makes it easier to understand the composition of any work of art. Let's start by looking at some examples from our artists and see what we can learn from them. Then we'll take our knowledge into the field. So, where do you start when taking a photograph? When you're taking a photo, it's a good idea to think about the act of looking. You are showing the viewer what you see through your lens, but more than that, you're showing them your point of view. The horizon line is a good place to start. Let's look at how key that single line is in Janusz Robles' Temagami Shores. With a different composition, the implied emphasis of this photograph would change. If the horizon line were lower, this photo would be about the sky. A higher line would place the emphasis on the water. As it is, the focus is not just on the water or the sky. It's balanced and speaks to the scenery as a whole, the harmony between elements. So, when you're photographing a scene, consider the following. Where are you, and therefore your viewer, in relation to the subject? And what is the subject? What are you trying to emphasize? Is it something above the horizon line or below? Is it one detail, or is it the grand scheme? Besides using the horizon line, let's consider some other ways that you might bring symmetry and perspective into your photography. The square composition of this photograph from Lynn McIntyre allows for an even more balanced, harmonious landscape. We can clearly see where the frame might be divided into 4 equal triangles. There's symmetry not only top to bottom, but side to side as well. Like Janusz's piece, this balance allows the photograph to speak to the landscape as a whole. But what if we narrowed in on a detail of Lynn's photograph? How would our understanding of the image change? What would we be losing, and what would we be gaining? A close-up can be an interesting and unexpected take on a landscape. This photograph by Stephen Landers is an excellent example of just that. How does a detail like this affect our experience of a scene? In this case, the texture gives us a sensory experience. We can almost smell the grass, hear it rasp in the breeze. These are details we might miss in a wider shot. Now let's pull away from the landscape a little and look at it in a different way, through a window. Paul Simon has framed this scene looking out from within, completely changing the viewer's understanding of the landscape. Unlike the other landscapes we've looked at, this one has us removed from the scene. The focal point of this photograph is what first draws our eye. The view through the window is bright, foggy, and full of movement, while the interior the viewer is standing in is dark, still, and quiet. Just like in Stephen Landers' image, the rich textural details in this scene give us a very sensory experience. We can practically hear the waves crashing outside. We can feel a cold draft coming in through the window. So when you're taking your own photos, consider some ways that you might creatively frame your scene and how this might tell a different story. So, we've looked from far away, up close, outward. What if we try looking up? If you've ever visited us at the Carnegie, this one might look familiar to you. Neil Frederick Sharp's photograph transforms the space of the Barber Atrium. It's an excellent example of just how effective a change in perspective can be. How can you approach your subject to offer us a fresh, unexpected view? Here, the intersecting lines and contrast between light and shadows create energy and movement. Architecture is rich with lines and angles that can make your photo more dynamic. Now that we've seen some examples, let's take what we've learned so far into the field and try looking like a photographer. Okay, so we're on location, we are out in Dundas, we have our phones, and we're going to take some photos together and see what we've learned and what we can apply to our own photography. So, where do we start when we're taking a photo? We're going to start by really looking. Remember Janusz Robel's landscape. What are we looking at and from where? So we've got a little creek with a tiny waterfall here. We could do kind of a classic approach and go straight on and get, a bit of the horizon line in there, the shape of the river. What I really like is when we look down, we've got some ripples in the water. So I'm gonna work with that pattern. There's a lot of movement in that. So like we said, looking up can be a really interesting take. So this tree has some really beautiful shapes and lines, some nice texture. I think that speaks to the landscape really well. Now let's try looking more closely. What's around you that might be getting overlooked? Are there any details or textures that we can use to speak to the larger scene? Jennifer Finn's work is another example of the richness that detail can offer us. This close-up shot becomes its own interesting composition, almost an abstract image. Since our phones are almost always on hand, they're perfect for capturing these incidental details. As we've seen, photography does not have to feel static. It can speak to time, movement, change. When you're shooting, stay open to the unexpected. Your phone can be a tool to capture candid moments. Accidents, action, and the mundane can all be beautifully expressed through photography. And with the ideas of movement and candidness in mind, let's take a look at a new subject, people. So we haven't yet touched on portrait photography, but so much of what we've talked about can be applied here too. These photos by Laura Moore use composition, shape, and movement to offer us a unique point of view. A portrait isn't always as simple as pointing a camera at your subject head on. There can be so many interesting and expressive ways to photograph a person. Look at how Laura uses negative space and the shape of the body to transform her subjects. When you're taking a portrait, try the same methods for looking. Ask yourself, who am I looking at? What approach can I take to show the viewer my unique point of view? What happens if I change the composition? Zoom in or out, pan up, down? How does that affect what I'm expressing in this photograph? So, with the help of some talented artists, we've learned that looking carefully and composing thoughtfully can make all the difference in taking a photograph. And I hope that the next time you're looking at a photo, in a gallery, in a magazine, on your phone, you'll take a moment to consider what the artist is showing you and some techniques they might be using to invite you into their point of view. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon.